Hello and welcome, everybody. I am Pete, and we have all come here today to celebrate the launch of a wonderful book called Quaint Creatures, Magical and Mundane, by our wonderful guest, by our wonderful author who is not here right now, Andrew D. Meredith. However, we do have another guest here today who's very well acquainted with the book. Would you like
Yes.
to introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, I am Norik Softstep. I'm the owner and proprietor of of this pet shop, Quaint Creatures. I am a former dungeon inspector who now owns a pet shop, and on the side, I still do some inspecting for friends of mine who own dungeons to make sure that they have everything taken care of, from the care and maintaining of the creatures that work inside of their dungeon to even the denizens that work there, the sentient denizens, so we can make sure that they have a good working condition, whether they're dead, undead, fey, or really anything.
Very nice. And then, would you like to introduce yourself, Anitha?
Hello, I am Anitha. I would read Warlock in the sideways. So I am well acquainted with Mr. Norik Softchef. He is a good veterinarian. If you have any problems with your creatures, any questions about their health, please don't hesitate to contact him.
Thank you.
So this, what was I going to do? Administration.
Yes.
We're not going to be talking spoilers about the book, FYI, considering neither of us have actually finished it. I am within pages, and then Anitha is light years behind, I assume. But we would like to talk a little bit about the world of Quaint Creatures, the Sideways.
Yes.
So, Mr. Softstep, how did you? Oh, cool. We have some people that are looking into the stories. Mr. Softstep, how did you get into, being in the DOA and being inspector with there?
Yeah, so I got a job at the DOA, which is the Dungeon Inspection Organization. I haven't worked there for like a year, so I hardly remember what I actually did there, mostly because they let me go. But I got a job with them right out of college, out of veterinary school, and I was inspecting for them for quite a few years. And I would go into dungeons to, again, make sure that their dungeons were up to code so that they could get approval for through DOA, so that way, if they need accreditation for a city, so that taxes are being paid properly, so that the city is more than happy to put a bus stop out by their dungeon, so it's easier for the heroes to get to it to adventure. That's why you want DOA accreditation. And so I was working for them for maybe 6 years. It's kind of a blur. But I ended up getting out after they let me go when I was a bit of a whistleblower. I found my Stymphalian Crane, who's out on a flight right now, so he can't be here today. But I found him in one dungeon and turned him in so that he could be rehabilitated. And the very next dungeon I was at a couple weeks later, there he was again. So I knew that there were those that were funneling animals from one dungeon to the other, despite their health. And I blew the whistle and kind of caused a bit of a mess.
Yes, and big corporations don't like causing big messes.
No, they don't, unless they're the ones causing the mess so that they can get financed on fixing them, right?
Of course.
Yeah, but you mentioned you have some. You did not realize you have such good friends. They helped you set up this shop, Quaint Creatures.
Absolutely.
So, can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, so the house that my wife and I bought, my wife Evelyn and I bought this Gnome Crafts house that turned out to be a very well crafted Gnome's Crafts house, because it doesn't seem to have an end. And every time we take another right turn into another hallway, we realize that we've taken 10, 12, 11, 13 right turns, and the house just keeps going, and we're not quite sure why. So we've been kind of looking through and figuring out why it does that. But in the meantime, it has allowed us to create a place where we can rehabilitate animals that aren't for sale, that just need to have some R&R for a year to decade in order to heal from the traumatic wounds or just traumas that they experienced at the hands of negligent or intentionally chaotically evil overlords.
Fantastic.
That's
And it's not,
nice.
the house isn't sentient by any means?
Not that we're aware of, but we haven't reached the end. Nothing has changed in the house, so it doesn't change hallways. Though we did lose track of hallways 9 3/4, and we're trying to figure out where that has gone. That has not happened yet, but we still have 9 and 10, but 9 3/4 is just missing.
Okay, since we are talking about 9 3/4, there are so many connections, or with Harry Potter actually. So, is it intentional?
I cannot confirm nor deny. Names have been changed to protect the innocent, but those that aren't innocent, yes, those references are definitely not innocent.
So you got fired for being a whistleblower. Does your
Yeah.
your country not have any protections against whistleblowers for big
There's not a
corporations?
whole lot of unified country. It's more city by city. So the organizations like DOA do run between cities, but it is very much a city by city situation. There's not a lot of country in the sideways, just because of how it interplays with the other worlds as well. You're lucky to find a strip that will lead. There's very narrow bridges between cities that are actually safe to travel, and so actually having a unified country would be difficult.
Oh, so these are a lot like almost like big giant islands that are
Yes.
floating in the ether type of deal.
Not so much in the ether as they're safe. So there's zones that are safe, and outside of there, whether you end up passing into the here ways or their ways, you're going to face very different dangers when you're walking between the worlds.
Are there animals and stuff that like to walk between the worlds a little bit that
Certainly,
make it
yes.
safer?
Yes, the other day I was helping a jub bird that is known to take steps through whichever world it wants to, so they can kind of walk on the air. It appears to be walking on the air, but it's actually stepping into and out of other worlds in order to kind of hop skip its way across reality.
Isn't the natural predator the jub bird the Bandersnatch?
Yes, and their preference is the toes of the jub bird. So as it's stepping through, that's when it's always looking for a chance to get a few nibbles in. Yeah.
Ah, yes. Good old Bandersnatch.
So, coming to magic system, so far only you seem to have that breath. Does anyone else can do that, or it's specific to James or you?
It can be learned. The breath tends to lean more towards those who follow a more druidic tradition, being able to reach down into their ways and use your own spirit as well to kind of siphon out magic and cause effects. A lot of it is kind of a bleed through between the different realms, as opposed to my wife, who's a warlock. She has, for the first time in 300 years, she has actually attracted the attention of the primary spirit of justice. Everybody has appealed to justice, and there are those who serve justice, but to actually have a constant attachment to the Dione of justice, the great spirit of justice, is very, very rare. And so she's able to do that. She's basically empowered directly by justice, and how much magic she can do very much depends on whether she is committing justice. And when things go awry, even there's too much injustice around her, sometimes there can be a spillage of justice magic to counteract that.
It's nice. So, talking about your wife, how did you two meet?
Yes. So I was on an inspection of a dungeon and was treating a fire salamander for some ice burns. And she was a torchbearer. So that's kind of an NPC, if you will, for heroes. Only the torchbearer's job is to make sure the heroes are doing their job, that they're collecting the correct amount of treasure, that they're not shorting the guild that they bring their money back to. So she was basically acting as a walk with these other heroes, and they happened to bust through the wrong door. They kicked the door in that I was working in, and the fire salamander spooked and completely incinerated the hero party. And my wife swears that I was smiling evilly. I was very happy to watch them burn, but I was actually smiling because, well, she's drop dead gorgeous and I couldn't help myself. I asked her for her number. She thought I asked for her number so that we could do the paperwork for this mishap. and she didn't realize it was
But
because I
you
wanted.
use that number to ask her for a date.
Most
That's
certainly,
very
I most
cheeky.
certainly did. Yes, and one thing led to another, and now we're here.
I mean, I like the bond between you and your wife, if I can say that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we have a very good time with each other. She's been spending most of her time actually down in the hallways, kind of cataloging them and coming to understand where they are. And like at one point, we found an entire biome that was self-sustaining, but it had gnolls. And the problem with gnolls is that once you get them, they're really hard to get rid of. And so they'll just keep raiding and coming upstairs and looking for trouble. So we ended up rehoming them to a maze outside of the city, and they're very happy right now.
Can we get a tour of the house at some point?
I would love to do a tour of the house. That would be great. I think after we finally finish a map of the entire house and figure out where it ends, then I'm most certainly will be able to show that.
We have a question from
Yes.
Derek B. It's asking, which creature is the quaintest of them all?
That's a good question. The quaintest creature of them all. What's that, Evelyn? Yes, probably the Pangatars. This little Pangatar has been hanging around our shop for a while now. I think his parents own a grocery store, but he's been coming over and he doesn't ask for payment, but he keeps doing stalking, so I don't tell him to stop. So yeah, but the Pangatars are one of the Vorpals. The Vorpal is kind of a broad term for all of the sentient creatures that were created during the Vorpaling. And the Vorpaling is when the Hereways and Theirways kind of crashed in a cataclysm together, and that's what generated the Sideways, is where the Hereways and Theirways met. It's safe because it's not dangerously full of life nor dangerously full of death. It's somewhere in between. And through that, those that died in the cataclysm, some of their souls jumped into nearby creatures. And so we ended up with a whole bunch of creatures like our little friend here, the Pangatar, and Pandatars, and Centaurs, and Minotaurs, you name it. And I'm sure there's more that we haven't even discovered yet.
Are all of the Vorpals, they're all mammals?
No, the Ornithars are avian, and they are probably the most numerous in type. They aren't just a single. They're much easier to spot the differences on a Ornithar than any other. And then there's the Serpentars as well. Serpentars are definitely not mammals.
Was there any specific way, was there any studies done on, hey, were there specific souls that jumped into specific types of creatures or anything along those lines?
Not that I'm aware of. I would guess that the world that once existed way back when it died, the souls that were nearest to where those creatures are probably the most likely to have actually entered those bodies and then formed them up into Vorpals. But it's also been millennia, so any cultures that would have existed back then are long past, due and have changed, and wars come and go, and it changes where they live and what part of the Sideways they're in. Yeah.
So, when did you find interest in these creatures? I mean, is it always your passion to go into this field, DOA, or?
Yeah, I had a rock bear as a child named Bear, and when my mother told me that he had gone out into the woods to live, I started to study a lot about bears and the rock bears in particular. And through that, it just one thing led to another again, and I fell in love with animals. And I've always been a bit of a gentle giant, if you will, to adopt the phrase that others often use about us giants. But I am a bit more of a gentle giant than others, and I'm not really into a lot of the sports that a lot of other giants are really big on. And so it just became natural for me to stick my nose into a book and learn about creatures. And then when I found out that there was a whole veterinary school attached to one of the primary academies, I was able to enroll in that and work my way through faster than most, just because I wasn't spending a whole lot of time delving that a lot of others were. I did minor in druidic lore, though.
So is being a hero and delving a part of the standard track of schooling in your world?
Very much so. A lot of people can't, poorer students aren't going to get on as many delves. They might barely afford to go to like the minimum amount. But if you graduate with enough credits in delving, you're going to be able to get better placing jobs. Like in any other city where if you have the money, you can buy your way into anything, and that's kind of the case. And of course, once you start delving, you start pulling treasure in, and there's a huge advantage to delving while you're in the academy because you don't get taxed as much because it all counts towards. The school still tries to take a portion of it, but it's not nearly as bad as it is for heroes that are doing it as a source of income.
Source of income.
Yeah.
So heroes are just like you talk about the incident with the fire salamander with the heroes getting torched. They just died.
Well, they died, and then of course there's the cleric. The cleric guild is always big about bringing them back, but it was a whole lot of paperwork. They were really low level. They probably shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And I did lock the door. I swear I did. So I'm not quite sure why they were able to get through that particular door, but they did, and that's life.
And death.
And death.
And
then
back
life
again.
And then life again. Yeah.
It's very nice. So if there are accidents in the so in terms of like the clerics guild's bureaucracy, I would say,
yeah.
When there are accidents in a dungeon, say there's unauthorized adventuring, and then there's say like people on the side that are, like yourself, like say a dungeon inspector accidentally gets killed. I'm sure that there's like paperwork and stuff involved where they would resurrect those people if they
very much so. That's the first thing I inspect before I ever even go to a dungeon. I make sure that they are up on their resurrection insurance, so that I can make sure that I'm protected if something happens to me. In the case of like a group of heroes that isn't supposed to be there in the first place, if they take damage, they will probably get healed eventually, but they're going to be in quite a bit of debt with the cleric guild, and it's going to take time. So they may end up, spending a couple of decades or so in the hellish landscape of the hereways, but they were somewhere they shouldn't have been. So they'll just have to wait their turn until they're brought back.
Okay. So would they be paying off the debt in the hereways, or would they be just like, is there a way for them to like consent to resurrection or dissent from or not consent to resurrection?
I would suppose so. I haven't personally had that happen to me myself, but I do know that down the street from the shop there is an Undertakers Guild, and their primary purpose is to do paperwork like that. They aren't actually resurrectors, but they do a lot of the paperwork pre and post mortem.
Oh, so they probably have their fair share of necromancers on their employ to contact the dead and stuff.
Very likely, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of interplay between how necromancy works right now because there's so many undead that have just been around and undead for so long that who knows when they were ever resurrected, not including the zombies. That was a complete different situation that caused them to occur. But I know that most of the skeletons that are like under the employ of my friend Synachron, he's had a lot of them working for him for forever.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And he raised them himself?
Some of them he'll acquire from other liches that are getting out of the business, and he hasn't. I don't know what the exact date is, but it's been at least a century since he's done any evil magic. He's been kind of on a road to recovery, but he still does a really good job of administrating his dungeons and likes to set up a lot of automated magic, so that way it doesn't have any effects on his alignment.
Oh, very interesting. So, like the type of magic you do directly affects your alignment.
It certainly can. It certainly can. It's also how do you use it, and if you have some shark of a lawyer who's looking to try to catch you doing something, even if it wasn't intended evil, you might get sued or found in use of an evil. Yeah,
oh,
you know what? To have a spell that just kills somebody outright, is that really any different than having a spell that kills somebody via lightning? Mm-hmm. I would say no. So the fact that there are certain spells that are illegal in some worlds doesn't really make a lot of sense, because in the end, if you're frying somebody with lightning, it's the same as saying abracadabra or whatever, and they just die.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very, very clever sidestep of a...
Trademark.
of a trademark phrase. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Do you let me pull up because I had some list.
Let's talk about your other friends.
Yes.
Hey, Mitch.
Image, yes. He well, we've only been open for about 2 years, and he came walking in, and he already had his. He just recently gotten his accreditation as a vet through one of the Dwarven academies, and had not found any other work yet. And I offered him a job on the spot, and just because of the fact that he's so very well organized, and I am not. So he's been really helpful at getting everything kind of put into place. So between both he and Evelyn, I can kind of wash my hands of needing to keep anything really organized. And I tend to go off on tangents in my mind, and so it can be hard to focus sometimes, and they help a lot with that.
I understand that.
He looks very disciplined and very comfortable with the other animals also.
He is. He's a little bit more crotchety than usual since his beard burnt off. So he's been eating a lot more pork right now to try to get that to regrow.
Ah. What is your favorite creature that you've had to take care of?
My favorite creature, it's probably my Stymphalian crane.
Neville?
Yeah, Neville's a very good bird. I really enjoy him. But I was very fortunate to have inherited along with the shop this Slimoid, Hubert. Very good at recycling. The only thing he doesn't compost is bones. But fortunately, Stymphalian crane is an osteovore, so I can rinse the bones off, feed them to him, and he makes them disappear real fast. And then in turn, whatever comes out of Neville can be put back into Hubert, and one thing, it's gone. So it's been pretty great. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it because I don't want him to outgrow his box. I haven't really looked up what I'm supposed to do once he reaches the lip. And I would hate to get rid of him, but maybe I can split him in two, and then I'll have two.
Mm.
I don't go very much, so
they're very much like worms, where you split them, where you keep splitting them. And
I think so. I mean, it's a slime, so I would assume if it gets cut in half, something will happen. I'm not going to do it until I've done my research, of course. But if I'm able to just split off or skim off a portion of Hubert and get a second one, I don't know what I'll do with him at that point. But at that point, the house will be so deep, I might be able to have a room that I can just put him into. Nothing bad can happen from that, right?
Of course not. He's not going to outgrow it.
No, not at all.
It's like a can of kombucha.
It is, yes. Yeah. I might have to move him into a bigger container here pretty soon. I need to rinse that fish off too.
Of course. So you see, you're surrounded by some very ominous-looking plants.
Yes. Ooh, yeah. No. Be really careful with a lot of these. Yeah, I mean, all creatures, we will take care of all of them, including plants. They need help just as much as anybody else. This particular one hasn't really done much. He keeps going after this bone, and he's bit my finger a couple times, but it's healed pretty well, so it's not toxic, which is good. That way I can leave it out and not worry about little children coming and touching them. It's hard enough keeping them from putting their hands into Hubert. If this was actually a poisonous plant, then it'd be a problem.
Of course. Children and people in general, I'm sure.
Oh, definitely. Yes. There's a lot less paperwork if an adult does it, because they did walk into a creature shop. The children, then it becomes a whole problem with their parents, and yeah.
Who knows?
It's a nightmare.
So which job did you enjoy the most? DOA one or this one?
I'm enjoying this one a lot more than my inspection job. Business has been good. We recently changed food suppliers for our lower end food. And so that's been a huge benefit, because I've been wanting to get into a better situation for food that we could offer. But when we first opened up, we were a bit strapped at the point, having just bought the house, even if we got it for a song. And so it's been good to be able to change over to better food practices for the animals.
A bit of out of a left field question, but do you pay property taxes on your home?
Yes, we do, and that is one of the issues with a gnome built house is that it has a lot more ground space, and that's why we got it for the song that we did. Fortunately, I've been fortunate to become friends with several council members, and so that's allowed me to, well, for instance, well, I can't say exactly everything, but there's something that occurred in the city recently, and so I've been able to use my house to home the situation, and that situation is probably going to pay for itself.
Of course, of course. So, like, how do they appraise the fair market value of a craft house like this? Like, I'm sure it's completely different in terms of like whether you're trying to think about um, square feet and anything like that, because that's
Yes.
not something that you know.
Fire insurance isn't too bad though, because if you can convince the fire to go the other direction, down farther into the house, let it burn out, versus it coming out of the house. But in the end, our footprint in the actual city is still the size of a normal house, so it's not like a fire that breaks out 20 hallways down is going to have an effect on anything. Even if it got to the front room, it would only cause damages to the houses directly next to us. So by then you should have it under control and you can do something. So fire damage hasn't been too bad. Yeah.
Very nice.
And there's a whole issue they have with where you can build a gnomish house. So I have one in my neighborhood and I don't know where the nearest one is. They cannot be built next to each other. My understanding is it generates a bit of a portable hole situation, and so you got to be really careful with not having them too close, because then they start overlapping on each other in the void, and then you have a whole problem. Yeah,
sounds like it.
I know there was rumors of one gnomish house that when they finally discovered the other end of it, it was the front end of another house in another city, and that was nice.
That would be very useful, especially if it takes less time to walk.
Yep. I think they ended up boarding half of that up because the owner was a known thief, and
oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So do you only have like one front door? Or is there like a back door as well that you can get into? Like you're talking about the front room. Is it just the front door on that?
So we have a front door and a bay.
Door.
There's a bay for like bringing like griffins in. Larger animals can come in there. We can put a carriage in there, and that just leads also into the first hallway. So for the most part, yes, only one direction in. We've not found any back door out of the house itself.
So dungeons and
Yes.
heroing, I guess.
Yes.
The economics of it is a really interesting thing to me.
It's very intricate.
How do you of course, how do you like decide to build a dungeon? Like I understand you have to get accreditation of some sort in order to be like, hey, you can come to my dungeon and stuff like that. But
Yep. Besides like heritage dungeons that have been around for forever, those tend to be smaller just because they're from forever ago and half of them have fallen apart and that sort of thing. But to actually build a dungeon, you need to have the demand, right? If a city already has a certain number of dungeons around the area, they're not going to let you just build another one, even if there's space for it, because it might start taking away too much income from the other ones. So you get into a whole guild fight of that. So a lot of the new dungeons have been built way out in wastelands. Some of them are even in like pockets of sideways that are not even reachable except by teleport. So someone has to, actually travel out there to the location to set up a teleport so that you can start building in a little pocket of the sideways. So that becomes a whole issue, and certain peoples are much better about that than others. Dwarves have a much easier time going through the hereways, despite all of the death magic that's everywhere. They just tend to be much more resilient, or they'll just drill their way there, kind of drill a hole through reality, if you will.
of course.
So you build out there, and then you have the whole issue of how do you convince heroes to even come out there, and what happens if the teleportation, if the portals break down, you got to get a repairman out there. So it can be a nightmare to have a brand new dungeon way out there. So a lot of times it's easier to just buy an old one and refurbish it. And then you've already got all of the logistics set up in place with the city. Of course, they might ask for a little bit bigger of a cut now that it's a new owner, because they haven't had a chance to update it in the last 40 years. Yeah.
Do you have issues with any sort of gentrification in terms of like getting new dungeons in or getting dungeons
Absolutely.
out to maintain population?
Absolutely. You know, when you put a really nice, when there already is a really nice giant tree based dungeon, and they put in like a zombie field right next to it as a dungeon, that can be, people don't like that, right? Because who wants zombies next to their trees? But a lot of the zombie type dungeons are a lot easier for smaller, younger heroes to get in on, and so having something that is accessible right next to something that's maybe a little bit middling in the case of its of skill required to make it through can be really beneficial. So sometimes they'll make allowances, or put up a nice picket fence between so you can't see the other thing. Yeah.
So would you say there's a lot of pressure on cities to maintain like dungeons of all dungeons for heroes of all ages, essentially, or all levels?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge benefit to making sure you have enough dungeons, because drawing heroes does bring a lot of new income to the city. And then, of course, you get taxes from the dungeons themselves, right? One of the big downsides has been the pottery trade. Actually, the pottery trade, there are groups of pottery guilds that make a lot of money by doing pottery resales. So you buy pottery insurance and pottery from them. So when heroes come through and start just smashing pottery in your house, it's much easier to get it replaced, because the pottery, it's already cheap. It was cheap in the first place, and it gets easily replaced. And but when that first started happening, back in, I don't know, like 72, 83, that was a problem, because there were a lot of potters who had to leave the cities because people kept destroying their pots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Rampant adventures, both a blessing and a curse.
They are.
So what's like a mainstream of income if you're running a dungeon? Because I always feel like that, like when you go into a dungeon, your goal is to take a lot of money out of it. So like, how do you maintain an income stream as an owner of one of those?
That's a good question. I think last time I checked, the gnomes have pretty strong, like what would be called like a leprechaun magic. So they're able to do a lot of regenerative gold. It's also, I know a couple of dungeons that made their bones, not a pun intended, on working with banks to use their dungeon as the insertion of newly printed and newly minted gold. So that way, it's a way for it to enter the economy without having to find investors in a bank to help work with that. So.
Okay. So it's so the bank is basically investing in the dungeons as well. That's a very interesting strategy.
Exactly. I don't know if that I off the record, I'm not sure if they're using it as a means to launder particular investments as well, because that can also happen. And I have come across at least one dungeon that was someone from the criminal underground was using a dungeon as their launder point.
Mm-hmm. Instead of using just a standard gnomish regeneration.
Yeah. Exactly. And I that doesn't fall under my purvey. I was dealing with animals and creatures. There's a whole other organization that actually looks at the accounts of a lot of the dungeons and the heroes guilds as well, because there's so many hero guilds.
I would guess that there might be rampant inflation in some places if you have like regenerative money and stuff like that.
Most certainly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's got to be some crazy. Do you guys ever like have any sort of I don't know, reset where either the banks or governments decide to buy back a lot of the money in order to counter inflation in any chance?
It may have happened. It hasn't happened in my lifetime, and I'm 85 years old, so I'm sure it has happened, and not necessarily in where I've lived, like either in Brightfall or up north where I went to my academy, or out where all the giants live on our island. That one is very we don't use a lot of cash as or gold as giants. It's a much more barter system situation, and a lot of inherited wealth of land. But it still has a benefit, because then you can draw loans against land when you're in other nations as well, or in other areas, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Who typically takes up your accounting jobs in this world? This is something that I just find super fascinating.
That's a good question. I think there's I think there's one brownie family that has like has a firm in almost every city. I think it's the Wagari family. It's the Wagari family. Yeah,
Of
that's what their
course,
name is. Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Okay. Can we move on from
Oh,
economics to some interesting topics,
Absolutely.
interesting features of the shop Quaint
You want to
creators
know
could
about rune
break for?
programming?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, so runic magic is it's been pretty important over the last couple of centuries. Everything from um, runic lines where you can call other people, and a lot of those you pay into the system itself. Like you can drop a coin and it will go through the system and pay for the call to connect your call to somebody else with a rune line. Um, they're a little bit finicky. I don't when they first came out, I was distrustful. My father was really distrustful, and he still refuses to have anything runic in his house. But I've got a rune line in the house that we're at, and um, you know we're so far past when the runelings gain their sentience that we're not really worried about some kind of runeling uprising occurring like we were back during the runic zombie wars. But yeah, and now we're here, so it's just kind of the way it is now.
Sorry,
Um,
there's an ambulance going on.
I agree with this, Derek. Anitha does have no topic for or no stomach for money, but dark magic, yeah, let's go. I mean, would you call runic magic dark magic?
I don't actually understand it. My understanding is you draw lines with metal in a stone that's been cast, then you shoot electricity through it, and from that you can play games, talk to each other. There's a lot of things you can do with runic magic.
It's like technology in this world. I'm into tech. That's why I'm interested.
Mm-hmm. Do you type things on a board with it? Has keys that go up and down?
Yep. And the combination that you use your fingers actually creates words on the. Yep.
Yeah, on the magic box. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Of course. Runic magic by any other name.
The other thing that's been happening a lot around here, because we just hired a housekeeper and someone to help me in the shop, is that Lily Vander has been making pies nonstop, which is great. I've got a blueberry pie she just made today, and over here is a chicken pot pie. I can't eat that, but everybody else in the house can. I'm a pescatarian, but it smells great.
So, are you planning to open a bakery on side business?
Not myself, though. There is a rumor that I know two people who are thinking of opening a pie shop.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as a pescatarian, do you work with fish or anything along those lines?
I do. You can't see it here on the rune camera, but off screen there's a whole line of rockfishes and I can sell them if people actually want them as pets. Very few do. When they get too big for their cage, they go into the boil, and I eat them and move on with my life. So
there's no ethical implications of that.
Nope.
Of eating things that could be pets.
It's the same as a pet shop that keeps a tenta rat next to a hydra. When the tenta rats get too old and they're no longer sellable, you got to feed the hydra tenta rats anyway, and so they just get popped in, and circle of life continues.
Of course. Very, very pragmatic.
So let's go ahead. Let's talk about how you're neutral in everything. Did something happen that made you like that, or are you like that from the beginning since you were a kid?
Giants are generally neutral. We tend to lean very neutral. We're never usually looking for trouble. Trouble finds us, and so as a people group, we tend to be fairly neutral. Not to say there aren't exceptions to the rule, of course, and life can lead to different things as well. But for the most part, we kind of pop out neutral, not out of the ground, mind you, but the usual way, and And so, yeah, we're a very neutral people, and I've been able to maintain that. I go in about once every 5 years for an alignment checkup to make sure that I have maintained my alignment. And sometimes I'll have to, do a few good things here, bad things there, to kind of rebel maybe a little bit, to kind of push myself back towards neutral if I've been a little too good. Which, as long as I can keep my alignment towards the neutral, that also helps, because I can hang up a paper on my back wall that says he's neutral, and it's a lot easier to get jobs from both sides.
Interesting. So does everyone have to go for alignment checkup like that?
No, it helps in your standings. I'm not a venturing hero, but venturing heroes are constantly going in to make sure that they haven't flipped one way or another, because it can affect like whether they can use their particular magic that they're using. So it's important to try to maintain that, especially if you're actually in the power rankings as a hero. Like Rosamundista Everdread, your cousin, Anitha, she's the highest ranked. She's the highest power ranking hero and battle mage in the last, I think, 2 centuries. So and she's talking about not venturing anymore, but it would take so much work for someone to pass her because she pushed so far ahead. But she graduated early from her school, and so it's going to be a long time before someone actually surpasses her.
I'm very sad that she's planning to retire. I'm actually trying to learn teleportation from her.
Yeah, she's actually thinking of staying here in Brightfall with her daughter, as far as I'm aware. Yeah.
So Anitha, how does that work? Rosamundista is a Pandatar, and you are a human. How does that work that you guys have the same, are cousins?
It's very complicated. we are related through.
Is it by marriage? Is she actually your cousin, or is your husband her cousin?
Yes, thank you. That's correct.
That's very complicated, Anitha. Very, very complicated.
See, the point is I'm trying to learn her skills. That's what is important.
Right.
Being a human, being inferior, I'm trying to learn.
I wouldn't call you inferior, by no means. They're just a very savage people, even if they are adorable.
Of course. Look, today's day and age, it's really hard to tell.
Yep. When you're sitting in a chair, you can't tell if you have a bushy tail or not.
Last I checked. Who knows? The vorpal traits can manifest in some crazy ways sometimes.
That's right.
Stop putting me in a box.
Nobody puts Anitha in a box.
Yeah.
Unless it's a lich.
Or it's a jar.
Or a jar, sure. Yep.
So, you are pretty comfortable in being a owner of the Quaint creatures now.
Okay.
You are not planning to go back. So, what can we expect? What kind of adventures can we expect in future?
Very good question. I don't know if I'm planning on going in any adventures anytime soon. That could certainly change. I do know that there is another adventure coming on the horizon very soon from a couple of my friends. I can't spoil too much about it because by the time you get to the last page, you'll probably have a good idea of what the next 2 adventures are in the Sideways. But they will be revolving around characters that you have already met. And I know that the author is planning on, his goal is that every book should make people demand 6 more completely unrelated books. and if I can do then 2 of those, the author says he'll be very happy to do that. He says in 3rd person.
Okay, so
You have it on
not author.
But they will be cozy.
Okay. Do we get to? Okay, I have so many questions.
Okay.
Will we see Evelyn's backstory? I mean, she is very old.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's an elf.
I wouldn't say that way to her. That would be kind of rude. But
I apologize.
she is a few centuries old. I can't give you exact dates because she's right here and she would kill me, but she's in her 3rd century right now.
Okay, my question is, I apologize to Evelyn for my lack of proprietary. My question is, do we get to see in future any of her previous adventures?
I don't know about previous, but maybe she'll have an adventure somewhere else on her own. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Certainly possible. Unfortunately, the author that is writing these particular books for me and writing for the other people in the Sideways, he does not have homunculus apes writing for him, typewriters. So unfortunately, there's not. I don't know that he can write nearly as fast as Cephas Hymason can.
You should embrace rune technology and buy rune typewriter. No,
That's true. That's
fast. Derek.
Derek says that Anitha got drunk on rune magic and forgot her manners. When you see just power like that, it's hard to remember who you are and what.
It's
what
the side effect of. It's the side effect from learning teleportation.
Of course.
Yep, that does it.
The arrogance is going to my head.
I mean, Anitha, are you sure it's the teleportation, Anitha? I feel like you're some person who more like to try necromancy because of some of the more sordid applications of sending out personalized assassins to take out people.
Or you might just be branching. Maybe you're a little bit giant.
I would like that.
It helps to see over everybody when you're 8 feet tall. It doesn't help if there's cut purses around.
Of course. So is there anything else that you would like to talk about, Mr. Softstep, today?
I think that's everything. I know that we have a deal at Quaint Creatures right now, and the book is being sold in runic form for 99 cents through the end of today on a some place that's named after some jungle that doesn't exist anymore.
Of course.
And a river as well. But I know that it is for sale for only 99 coppers at this point. And then after tomorrow, it will go back up. But now is a great time to purchase Quaint Creatures that way. Or you can order Quaint Creatures in physical, signed by the author. If you ask, might even be signed by Norik. I would be happy to sign it for you. Just so you know, I can't sign it for them. And I'd be happy to sign it, and that is orderable off of the author's website, which is andrewdmeredith.com, or you can go directly to the sales portion, which is games-afoot.square.site, and buy directly there, and we will have it signed and sent out to you post haste.
Yep.
And the audiobook is read by myself.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to shout out audiobook. The narration is so good. I mean, we get to see how Norik Softstep's brain works, and that, I mean, we get to meet all these customers, little kid, and the narration, actually little kid's voice also, he did such a fantastic job. And later on we get to meet Mr. Softstep's cousin, and that voice is just amazing. Those two stood out for me.
Thank you. Felbertha is very near to my heart. I was sad when she left our family home and left, but the fact that we ran into her again was just icing on the cake.
Of course.
I think from that dinner, we got to know there is some kind of background story to your family.
Yes.
So, do we get any information on that, or in future, any story behind that?
We might. I've been talking to Evelyn about making a trip back home, so we might have to go back there sometime. Yeah. It'll be very different without my grandfather there anymore. He was kind of the tie that binds, my great-grandfather anyway. But he was the tie that binds for the family, and so it's been a little bit tense there, which is why a lot of us have left. But it also coincided with me leaving for college, and so it just happened to work out that I was able to kind of get away without any bad blood between me and extended family members.
Well, thank you for coming. I really
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Unless there is anything else you want to talk about, Anitha?
No, I want to ask if you can ask the
Oh.
author, Mr. Andrew D. Meredith,
Yeah.
who is his favorite character?
Did you hear the question? Yeah. He says that his favorite character turned out to be Glasstrow, actually.
Mm.
Ah, nice. That
Yeah.
would be. And also, can you ask your wife who is her favorite out of all your friends? Who is her favorite to get along with?
What do you think, Evelyn? She says Synachron. That's always an easy answer.
Why is the author and your wife standing at the same place?
No, author's over here. Evelyn's sitting over here. She's sitting with this with a runic. She's writing a story about herself. It looks like.
Oh,
Anyway, thank you for answering our questions, Mr. Softstream.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you for having
this
me
was-
on.
very informative. I have plenty more questions about tax policy and stuff,
Economics.
but I'm sure I would have to talk to that accounting firm that you were talking
Mhm.
about with the brownies.
And I know that now the author is going to rewatch this entire rune stream and glean everything that I've said, because what I said is all truth.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody, all the links down below. All the links are down below, whether it's to the Amazon site or the two websites that you mentioned.
And please make sure to visit Quaint Creatures if you go to Brightfall.
Please
Yes. Wonderful place, wonderful story, wonderful book. Really loving it. Have a great rest of your night, everybody. And we'll see you later. Get some rest. Rest is important.